Hello everyone and welcome to The Great Everything, your source on Anchor for cultural discoveries and philosophical musings. I'm Patrick, a former banking lawyer who saw the light and quit to dedicate my life to those two things, culture and philosophy, which I see as the greatest self-development tools of all. So, I feel I've bored you enough with music these past few days, so how about we get back to some philosophical considerations, in particular, liberty. A couple of days ago, I went to a lecture on John Stuart Mill, and his famous essay on liberty was discussed. In the essay, Mill sets out his idea of negative liberty, and that, broadly speaking, can be described as freedom from, specifically freedom from interference. So it's the idea that we are free to do whatever we want, as long as we don't hurt anyone else, of course, and that nobody else can interfere with us. Nobody can put obstacles there, stopping us from doing what we want. As long as what we want doesn't adversely impact anyone else, we should be free to do it. We should be free to choose what we eat, what we believe, what we say, who we sleep with, what we do to and with our bodies. And I think that we all agree that this is a good bedrock for our liberal societies. Nobody should have the power to force you to do anything or stop you from doing anything, other than, of course, if it's preventing harm to others. But let's consider context for a moment. Mill is trying to find intelligent ways to regulate the relationship between the individual and the state. Why? Well, because think about it. Since the agrarian revolution 10,000 or so years ago, we have all, to some extent, been oppressed by some form of state authority or religious authority in some theocracies, like under the Catholic Church up to just a few hundred years ago. So there's always been an interference from a state authority, a king, an emperor, a pope, a local lord, telling us what we could do and what we couldn't do. We have been oppressed. And those agents, those governmental state agents have been the main obstacle to our freedom. So he's coming up with ways that for them to stay out of our way, for us to be able to do what we want and still maintain social order, because we're not harming anyone, we're not harming each other, we're just exercising our own negative freedom. So this is all great, but where does that leave us now? Because now, of course, states, religious authorities can interfere with our lives, in the sense that they have the ability to, although we live in rather liberal societies, but they are not the only agents who can interfere with our lives. Take freedom of speech, which I think is the most important freedom of all, because it's the one that allows us to peer review our ideas and hopefully, when the process works, to reject the shitty ideas and keep working on the good ideas and to improve them. And that's how we move towards a better society. Freedom of speech is the basis of progress. Anyway, where does that leave us with freedom of speech? Because nowadays, it's not really the state stopping you from saying stuff. Yes, there's cases of censorship, and they should be called out, and they should be talked about in negative terms, personally I'd say. But really, the state is not the guy who's stopping you speaking these days. We all know the kind of things we're hearing about Twitter mobs and about college campuses with people shutting down speakers. And my question is, how do we deal with that? Because on the one hand, you'll have one group of people saying, well, you're stopping others from speaking, and so you don't believe in free speech. This is a free speech issue. And the other group of people will say, well, no, this isn't a free speech issue, because things like the First Amendment only regulate the state's ability to stop you from speaking, to censor you. So we're not a state authority, so the First Amendment doesn't apply. Besides, it's my freedom of speech to stand here and shout at you while you're trying to give a speech. And that is technically correct. I can't argue against that. But I'm proposing that perhaps the idea of freedom of speech and other basic freedoms should evolve, because our times have evolved. We no longer live in a time where the state is the only factor and agent that can interfere with our freedoms. Other people now have the power through social media and congregation to do that. Perhaps we shouldn't be looking so much at the letter of the law, but at the principle. As Mill said, if all mankind minus one were of one opinion and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind.